Okay, so let's get right into it. What are the learning outcomes that I need to teach you? Well, by the end of this class, you should be able to describe and discuss professionals in the building industry. That means who are the professionals that are involved in a building of a structure. Let's assume a mall is being built. Now, we are in the beautiful sunny Pretoria right now. That's where I'm recording from, and we have a very famous mall here called Menlyn Mall. Okay, it's one of the biggest malls in South Africa, if not the biggest. I think it is the biggest in South Africa currently, as I record this. There are others that are planned to be much bigger, but anyway, we are not there. What I want you to imagine is that Menlyn Mall is being constructed, and this is what we are talking about. Now, in the construction of Menlyn Mall, before the mall is actually constructed, there are professionals that are involved in the building industry. Those are the professionals that we are going to be talking about. We're going to also learn how to describe and explain design team with respect to the architect's pre-contract, contract, and post-contract duties. Now, what are those pre-contracts? Now, let's start with contract. Okay, contract means the actual building phase, when the actual building is being built on site. So that means that pre-contract means before the building is built, what happens in that period. And post-contract means after the building has been built, what happens then. So we'll talk about those things, and then you have a great understanding. Okay, we'll also talk about the surveyor. We'll talk about the surveyor's duties, what the surveyor does, the types of surveyors. We'll talk about the town planner, what the town planner does, how he's involved in the project. And then we'll talk about the various engineers. Now, growing up, I thought the only type of engineer was a civil engineer, because growing up, my dad was a civil engineer, and I was surrounded by civil engineers because my dad was in that industry. So even myself, I'm a civil engineer. I studied in UKZN, that's in Durban. I have a BSc, an honors degree in civil engineering. And when it comes to education, I'm doing my postgrad in education right now. So, you know, I worked from 2012. I think I in the industry of civil engineering from 2012 until 2017, round about there, 2017. And then I moved into the education space. Thus, I'm lecturing you right now. Okay. But like I was saying, growing up, I thought the only types of engineers were civil engineers until I went to varsity and I discovered that actually there's different kind of engineers. There's electrical engineers, there's chemical, mechanical engineers, and all types of engineers. And even within civil engineering, there's different types of civil engineers. There's structural engineers, there's geotechnical engineers, and various other types of engineers like marine engineers. There's also under civil, there's also the agricultural engineers. It's just different types of engineers. Okay, so we'll get to talk about the ones that are involved in the construction of a building per se. Okay, so that's what we'll talk about. And don't worry, this is not going to be a long lecture. I don't know the outcomes, they seem to be a lot, but they really go fast. They really go fast. So professional consultants' duties and responsibilities in building projects will be discussed. Like I said, earlier that we'll be talking about the duties and the responsibilities of all these professionals that are involved in the construction of a building. Okay, now let's start with the employer, the person with the vision, the person, the initiator, the boss, the one who says, I want a building to be built. Okay, now what is the employer? This is the person or a company or an institution who desires to have a building erected. So now talking about Menlyn Mall. Now, Menlyn Mall was built by a company, a real estate company. Now, that company becomes the employer. Okay. Now, some of the duties and responsibilities of that employer is that he indirectly pays the salaries and wages of the building firm's employees. So everyone that is going to be working for the employer must be paid by the employer. Okay, one of the biggest duties of an employer is to pay salaries to everyone working for him. It's also another duty is to hold preliminary discussions with the architect about the proposed project. So the employer will approach a architect and say, listen, I want a mall to be built here, and please design the mall for me. Okay. Another responsibility of the employer is that he must analyze and collect all relevant information to assist the designers, which is so when he approaches the architect, he must tell him where the location of the site is. Okay, as in Menlyn must be built, the location is in Pretoria. In Pretoria East, specifically in a place called so and so, and coordinates and all of that. And then the next thing was telling about the space requirements, that okay, in Pretoria, this is the amount of hectares I have to build the mall. So that's it. The budget that I'm willing to pay so much millions of this building, and the time period for the design. Now they can negotiate and say, I'm giving you 6 months to design the mall, I'm giving you a year to design the mall, and everything included in it. And then the construction time as well, to say after being designed, I'm giving you 5 more years to actually do the construction. So that type of discussion happens between the employer and the architect. It's actually the employer's duty to tell the architect and give the architect this type of information. Also, it should not interfere with the project during construction works. So once the employer has approved the building, the construction, when the construction actually starts, okay, he is not supposed to go to site and stop work based on what the people on site are actually building. For example, if the architect had designed a window to be on the right of a wall, of a certain wall, the employer can now not go to site and say, no, remove that window from the right. I want it on the left. He cannot do that. Once the design has been approved, by himself, he cannot go back to his word now and make changes when construction is happening. So those are just some of the duties and responsibilities of the employer. Of course, there is more, but this is just a sample. Okay, now let's talk about the architect. Now, because the employer approached the architect first and gave him all the information to design this building, the architect has to be the head of the design team. Now, we will talk about the design team as we go on, because remember, there's also engineers involved and surveyors involved. All those people, they form part of the design team. But the architect is the head of the design team. He also becomes the manager of the employer, meaning he manages the exam. He becomes the manager, the CEO of the design team and the construction team as well. He becomes the manager. He manages everyone, and then he ensures that work is carried in accordance with contract documents. Now, remember that I said contract means during the construction. Okay. So pre-contracts, there would have been documents that were signed and approved. These documents could include the drawing, the design, and the municipal policies. There's lots of documents involved, but it is the architect's duty that the actual construction is done in accordance to those documents. Now let's just talk a little bit more about the architect, because he is the most important person when it comes to all of this building. Okay, so number one, architect's duties pre-contract, that is before construction is done, obviously is to design the building and head up the design team as well. It's also it becomes the manager. We've spoken about that. So those are just some of the duties of the architect pre-contract. Of course, there's more, but this is just to mention a few. Now, during the contract period, remember I said contract means during the construction period. Now, the architect supervises progress on the construction work, because he's the one who knows the design more than anyone else, so he needs to supervise as well to see if the contractor on site is actually building in according to the contract documents, and he's checking all the progress of how the construction work is going. He also solves problems and conflicts on sites, because sometimes maybe the person putting the windows is now fighting with the person putting the door, and there's a conflict between the two, as into where does the window go, maybe, and in reference to the door. If there's a fight between those people, it's the architect who can come and solve that type of problem, and many other problems on site and conflicts. He can appoint nominated subcontractors. He's involved in nominating the contractor who's actually going to build the building. Okay, so the company that builds the building is called a contractor, and there are also subcontractors, because the contractor might not be able to build everything. For example, the mall has escalators. Now, the contractor specializes on building the actual building, but not installing escalators. So then he will appoint a subcontractor to actually come and be involved in constructing that escalator. Okay, and then also like I was saying that so now the architect can appoint subcontractors as well, not just the contractor, but subcontractors as well. Okay, and then another architect duty during construction is that he issues variation orders in each stage of the project. What's a variation order, I hear you asking? So let's say, for an example, the architect actually designed a wall, and during the approval of the drawing, it was established that that wall will need, let's say, 50 bricks to build. So 50 bricks is ordered. 50 bricks is what's in the documents. So now during construction, they actually find out that that was a miscalculation. They actually need 100 bricks. Okay, or let me just be bold and say they actually need 150 bricks, not 50 bricks. They need 100. So now to order an extra 100 bricks, you use a document called a variation order. So it is varying from the original contract. It's varying from the original number of bricks. Okay, so it's called a variation order because it's extra over from what was contracted. Okay, so to buy extra, you do a variation order to order more bricks. And then also very importantly, an architect issues interim payment certificates as the work proceeds. So as the contractor is building something on the building, on a monthly basis, you probably want to prepare a payment certificate to say, I've done this much work, please pay me for this much work. Sometimes it just depends on the contractor. Some they want to be paid yearly, some monthly, just depends on their economic muscle. But let's assume they want to pay monthly. So each and every month, the contractor on site will say, I've done this much work. For the work I've done, please pay me this certain amount based on the work that I've done. So the contractor then prepares the interim payment certificate. Okay, it's during construction, it's interim construction. So now it's the architect's duty then to issue the payment certificate as well, to ask the employer. So the contractor will prepare it, give it to the architect, and then the architect will then give it to the employer to release the funds. That's how it goes. And then also the architect keeps the employer informed about the progress on site. So now the architect is like a middleman between the contractor on site and the employer. He updates the employer on what's going on site. Okay, and lastly, during the contract stage, which is the construction stage, the architect is the chairperson in site meetings. Now, the architect will hold site meetings with the contractors just to iron out issues, find out progress, and all of those other duties that we've mentioned before. Okay, so now all of these duties are of the architect during construction. Now let's talk about the duties post-contract, which means after the construction has been done. The architect does the final handing over of completed work, which means that the architect is the one then who gives the employer the completed work, who hands it over and say construction has been done according to my design. We have finished it. Here is the building now. Are you happy? Okay, so that is what the architect does. Also, this is done after maintenance period, which is referred to as patent defects liability period. Now, when you buy certain things, goods from the shops, they give you a warranty. So this is like a warranty as well, where they say that, say they give you a warranty of the year. It means that if there's a defect of that certain thing you've bought during that year, you can bring it. They will fix it for you for free. under no cost to you. If they can't fix it, they will replace it. That's what warranty is. So this patent defects liability period is similar to a warranty. Okay, and the architect is the one who says if there's something wrong with my design during this period, then I'll fix it for free, whatever the case may be. And then lastly, after the contract, after the construction, the architect hands over the final payment certificate. And also coupled with that is the final certificate of completion to enable the contractor to receive outstanding payments. So remember, there was an interim payment certificate, which was interim, which was during the construction. Now, post-construction, a final payment certificate is prepared to say, okay, based on what's been done, the final amount due or owed to items is this amount. So the architect is involved in that as well. Okay, so I think we're done with the architect. Now let's move on to speak about the duties of the land surveyor. What does the land surveyor do? So the land surveyor is involved early during the contract stage. Okay, also the land surveyor is, this means the land surveyor is also involved pre-contract. Before construction is done, the surveyor would go to site and say, okay, this is the site. He surveys this site, the area of the site, the topography, the highs and lows, the mountains and valleys on that site. He records all of that. So that's what the land surveyor does as part of his duties. And secondly, he measures the surface of the land, which is the area of the land. He measures all of that to say in actual fact how much land it is required. He also established levels to draw maps with contour lines. Like I said, those are the valleys and the mountains on site, just to say how high, how low. He establishes that as a land surveyor. He also starts with work with finding municipal beacons. So each and every land or area, city, town, there are certain municipal beacons which are put by the local municipality, and these beacons just say how high or how low is that area in reference with the sea level. Okay, so and where the location is. So there are the government, the municipalities, they do these things, these municipal beacons. Okay, so those are the duties of a land surveyor. Now there's the duties of a town planner. Now the town planner is not involved in construction or is not part of the design team, but he is a member of the local authority or the member of the municipality. He works for the municipality, and his job is to develop a basic plan of townships and suburbs, a basic plan for the land to say, okay, this is where we want the shops and this is where we want residential areas. Now, you cannot build a mall in an area that has been designated by the town planner for residentials. Okay, you can't do that. You can only build a mall in an area that's designated by the town planner for industrial use. Okay, so if we look at this picture here just to demonstrate, let's say these green colors, the town planner will say these green places are designated for parks. So it's a park, you can only put a park here. And then this yellow one, that's where the residentials would go. Okay, and then these orange ones, that's the industrial areas, that's where the shops will go. And yeah, he'll plan that for the shops. And maybe this purple one, he'll say then the industries will go there. That's where the factories will be, of construction and all of that site. And maybe the red one, it will say perhaps that's the landfill where things will be thrown away, collecting all the rubbish from the residentials, and also from industrial areas. You just come throw them here, the landfill, for example. That's what the town planner will plan that land. Okay. So also the town planner will give guidance as to what is allowed or preferred in a township or suburb. Like I've said, that he's the one who plans this, so he will advise you. If you come and say, I want to build a mall in my area that I've just bought a plot here in the Euro place, and I want to build a mall in that plot, the town planner will then give guidance to say, no, actually, that place that you bought is only designated for residentials. So a town planner will give guidance upon those things. Also, if you come to them and say, I want to build a mall, where can I buy? He will give guidance to say, oh, okay, this is the area designated for malls. You can buy in any of those areas. Okay, and then also he lays down principles to which type of buildings are acceptable in the area, like I've just explained. He responds to inquiries from community about compliance on new buildings. So let's say, for example, one of the residential people doesn't know which place is actually designated for malls, and then he sees construction happening on site. He can ask the town planner as to what construction is happening there. Is it a mall? Is it a factory? Is it a landfill? What construction is happening on that particular site? Then he is the one who's going to respond to say, oh, actually this place is only designated for malls, so that is a mall being constructed. Okay, so that is a duty of a town planner. Now, moving on, we've already spoken about this, that there are different duties of consulting engineers. Okay, now these engineers, they assist the architect in the design phase. Okay, so that's pre-contract. Before construction, engineers are involved in the design. Okay, because as engineers, we are heavily involved in design because we actually do the designs for the things that the architect does not design. Okay, now let's just talk about this. Remember, the architect just designs the structure, but it is now a structural engineer who designs the reinforcement of that structure. What's a reinforcement? Is basically making the structure stand, making the structure strong enough to actually stand. So how do you reinforce? You reinforce by using steel. As you can see from these pictures, these are some reinforcements. Okay, this is a reinforcement right here in the middle of a column. And here on the right, we have a foundation here with a column on top of it. That's the reinforcement of it. Okay, so a structural engineer actually designs these reinforcements. The reinforcements of the columns and the beams and the slabs and the staircases and the foundations, all of these construction bits, the reinforcement of them is done by a structural engineer. And then the civil engineer can also be a structural engineer, also specialize in the reinforcement work. This is just a picture to demonstrate the importance of reinforcement. to show that if there's no reinforcement, you put a point load, you put a point load or pressure or a force on top. Let's say this is a beam. On top of the beam will just crack easily and break. But now if you put reinforcement, as you can see, the reinforcement ensures that the beam does not break. Okay, that's it. That's what's being demonstrated here and here as well. Between reinforced concrete and pre-stressed concrete, this is just to demonstrate that pre-stressed concrete is much stronger than reinforced concrete, but pre-stressed concrete is the same thing. It's just reinforcement that was done in a factory as opposed to being done on site. Reinforced concrete, the reinforcement is done on site. Pre-stressed concrete, it's done in a factory, and those members are brought to site already built. Okay. And then we have electrical engineers. Now they design the electrical network in the building, where the electricity wires will go, the escalators, the lifts. The electrical engineers design all these things. Mechanical engineers, now they design the positioning of escalators, the conveyor belts, the lifts, the pumps in the building, all the mechanical stuff, whether they have electricity or not, but they design those mechanical things. Okay. This must be done in accordance with the ground plan. So obviously the architect would design that here I want an escalator. It is now the mechanical engineer who will design the actual escalator. And then we have geotechnical engineers, also known as soil engineers. They just look at the ground conditions, the conditions of the soil on site, and then they will design the foundation based on the soil conditions. So he performs site soil investigation. He must know the conditions of the earth on which the structure will be built, ensures the stability of the earth below by means of using piles and lateral supports. So what all of this means is that based on the site conditions, he will then design. For example, if the site soil is sandy, then he will put piles. But if the site conditions, the soil there is actually a rocky ground, there he will not use piles, but he will use lateral supports. He will use shallow foundations and all those types of foundations. Okay, now ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this lecture. Okay, I hope that you actually understood everything that we were doing today.